Доброго ранку. Доброго дня, пані Олександра. Ми розпочинаємо сьогоднішній вебінар. Сьогодні у нас два вебінари будуть здійснюватися представниками університету в Варшаві. Також нагадую всім, що ви можете скористатися перекладом на українську мову, який мову ви обираєте собі на панелі, яка знаходиться внизу, або англійська, або російська, але українською буде здійснюватися переклад. Тому ми розпочинаємо. У нас сьогодні представляє Олександра Павлічка. Да. Прошу, пані Олександра, вам слово.
Okay. So, I have a confession to make. I hated speaking in public. Many years ago, when I was still a university student, I was this shy person, sitting at the very back of the room in the last row, hiding behind the others or hiding behind my notes. Speaking in front of the classroom was a torture. My legs got shaky, my voice got squeaky, and I didn't know what to say. It was a disaster. And then one day, I heard that a school was searching for a substitute teacher, and I had to do this internship at my university. So I went to the interview. And then during the interview, they told me something like, "Great, you'll start in 2 hours." I wanted to run away and never come back, but I stayed there. And my first lesson felt terrible, but they didn't dismiss me. So I stayed. One more lesson, and one more, and one more, and another. And slowly, lesson by lesson, I felt better, more confident. My voice got stronger. And I felt I started enjoying speaking publicly. So much so that although I came there just as a substitute or just to do my internship, I stayed there at the school for more than a decade. And I learned that it is indeed possible to learn how to speak publicly. So my name is Aleksandra Pawlicka. I'm a teacher, I'm a researcher, now I'm a PhD student, and I like to think of myself as a writer. And today I'll show you how presenting your scientific work is something that you are going to learn too. I wasn't so special after all, because many people are afraid of public speaking. There are so many of them that psychologists called this phenomenon glossophobia, so the fear of speaking in public. It is so common that it is believed that at least 75% of people may be affected by that. Of course, to a various degree. Some people are less afraid and some people just panic when they have to speak. But despite that, our success in life nowadays largely depends on how well we can communicate our ideas. Think of studies, think of schools, think of all the exams at your schools. In Poland, it is matura, where you have to present in front of your teachers, and many other exams too. And of course, think of job interviews, where you have to speak, when you have to present. And so many people are afraid, and yet students are not really trained to speak. Students leave universities and are absolutely unarmed. They are defenseless. But the good news is that it is a common misunderstanding that speaking in public requires some special talent. In fact, it mostly requires some knowledge and a lot of practice. It only requires a teeny tiny bit of talent, if any. So basically, if you have the ability to speak, you can speak publicly. In this meeting, I'm going to talk about three things. First, I'm going to present how to structure your presentation to convey your message, to meet your goal. Then I'll talk a bit about slides, how to make them great, how to make them enhance your presentation. And finally, I'll give you some tips on how to speak, how to give the presentation in front of the public. And all this, what I'm going to tell you, it will work for your class presentation, it will work for your thesis defense, and also it will work for your conference talks and maybe job interviews too, who knows. And please, if you have any questions during the lecture, don't hesitate to ask. You don't have to wait until the end. I will gladly listen to your questions and I will gladly answer them if it is possible. So you can ask me whenever you want. So when you know you will have to give a presentation, think about its purpose first. The purpose of the talk definitely is not to impress the audience with how smart you are. You are not there to show them that you are so intelligent and you know so much. Similarly, you don't want to tell them everything you know about the topic, because the 20, 30 or 40 minutes is never enough. And also, you are not there to present all the technical details. Instead, you want them to take something away with them. You want them to give them the intuitive feel of the idea. And if it is a conference presentation, if you're a scientist or a PhD student, you want them to read your paper, to be interested enough to want and read your paper. You also want to engage everybody in the room to get the general idea of why your work is important. You maybe want to excite them or provoke them. You want to make them feel something, and preferably feel something positive. And you also would want we want to get them to know the specific methodology you're using, of course, if your presentation is about that. And also, you want them to know why they should even care about your subject. And even if the audience is quite knowledgeable in the subject you're presenting, for example, at a scientific conference among experts, definitely they will appreciate if you do a good job in teaching. Generally, you want them to put their laptops away, wake up, and be glad that they came to your speech. Please remember that when you present to the public, they give you something in return. They give you their time, and their time is their priceless commodity, so you don't want to waste it. Give them something in return. Give them something they value. So give them some knowledge, teach them something, and they will be happy that they came to your speech. And reaching all these goals I've just mentioned begins with a good design of the presentation. So before you even begin writing your ideas down, think about this for a moment. If your audience remembers one thing about your talk, one thing you've said, what should it be? So in other words, you have to identify your key idea, the main message of your presentation. And you should present this idea during your presentation. And be specific. Don't let the audience guess it. They don't have to figure it out by themselves. You can even be absolutely specific and say, for example, tell them, pay attention now. If you remember nothing else, remember this slide, or remember what I want to say here. And this will make them wake up. It will make them pay attention, at least for a short moment. So use this moment wisely and give them your key idea. So my key idea was presented at the beginning. You can learn how to speak, and I'm going to repeat it a few times, but that's the key idea. And when you organize your talk, organize it around your specific goal. You don't need anything else. Everything in your speech, everything in your presentation has to support your key idea. So cut all the irrelevant material. You don't need anything else, and everything else will be a waste of time of your audience mostly. And generally speaking, a fascinating presentation consists of 3 parts. There is the introduction, the goal of which is to hook the audience. Then you have to give some supporting evidence for your ideas, some examples, something which will paint the picture in front of the eyes of your audience. And then you have to finish with a powerful, memorable conclusion. It is really this simple. 3 elements: introduction, evidence, and conclusion. Nothing more. There are 2 types of presentation. You can make it shallow, but very wide. You can cover the whole topic, but to a very, very small degree. Or it can be very technical, very deep, but also very narrow. So definitely avoid those shallow overviews of the whole topic, because they just present a vague idea and there is nothing concrete in them. There is no meat inside. Of course, it is good to provide some overview of the topic for just to give the context and to position your subject in the context and to position your research or to position your results in the context, and then go into detail quite deep. But it is a good idea to cycle around the subject, to come back from time to time to the shallower level, just to get the attention of the audience who lost their way somewhere along the way, and then go deep and technical again, but never the dive inside. Immediately, you need to present some context first. There is an ongoing debate, and I can't really answer this question definitely, if you should present this what I have on the screen right now, because many people begin their presentation with an overview. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to discuss this and the result of that. You know what I'm talking about. And experts cannot really agree if it's a good thing or not, but some of them say that you shouldn't do this, because when you start with that, you know what you're talking about, but the audience knows nothing about the subject, and they won't know what you're talking about. It is incomprehensible because you didn't talk about that yet, and it is again a waste of time. And especially at the beginning of the speech, you may lose your audience. You may just they may just open their notebooks or scroll through their phones, and you lost them, unfortunately. So no, some people say it is just enough to have a very short, brief overview of what you're going to do, but in a very, very brief way, without too much detail or without detail at all. So if you absolutely need the outline, you can do this, but be as brief as possible here. And okay, that's it. Sorry, I've just said that. So when you design your presentation, always start with a common ground. What is a common ground? Even if you have the audience which is more or less at the same level, so your fellow students or fellow workers or experts at a conference, their level of knowledge may vary. So start with something which is common. For example, you can start with the assumption that everyone has the knowledge up to the high school, and start from there and gradually add more details, more technical knowledge. So ultimately, your goal is to teach them something. So it's never good to start too technical, because the people who don't have some knowledge, they will probably they will just stop listening, unfortunately. So and the other way around, even experts who have broad knowledge of this subject will listen with pleasure, because it's their subject. They love listening about that. So talk to them about their subject. They will appreciate that. So the common ground and progress in difficulty, and you'll be good. And examples, I just can't stress enough how important they are when you present something. When designing a presentation, provide good examples, and I can say they are your main weapon when you present. They motivate your whole work. They show why your field, why your subject is so important. But also, when people don't know their subject, good examples, they spark their intuition. They intuitively start to understand what you're talking about. They have a broader picture. But also, examples illustrate your idea in action. They show some extreme cases. Examples can show some exceptions, and also the pros and cons of your idea. So use examples to your advantage. And they are so important that even if your time is short, you can see that your time is running up. It is actually better to omit the general case and leave the examples, because they are, if you just present the idea without the examples, those people who didn't know what you were talking about won't have an idea after your talk either. And it is counterintuitive, but during presentation, the presenters often start with a general idea. So my idea is this or that, and here is the example, and there is another example, and so on. Whilst when we learn, we start by having a look at the examples. We learn example by example, and then we get the general idea. Do it during your presentation. Start with examples, show some examples, and then provide the general idea. They will understand it better. Especially during scientific conferences, you should, sometimes you're required to, present the related works, but don't do it at the beginning. You can sometimes see that, but don't do it. At the very beginning, your audience, well, they don't care about the related works, and those titles and names just tell them nothing, so it's a waste of time. Of course, put the related works at the end. It is their place, but be careful, because you must know the related works, because somebody can ask you a question about them. So be ready to answer a few questions about the related works. So don't be surprised if somebody asks you about them. And when you create your presentation, remember to acknowledge your precursors. So the people who did the thing before you. As you go along, so you say, for example, this is somebody did this and they did that, but also you should build a fence around your idea, so nobody confuses your work with the work of other experts. So my idea is similar to Kowalski's idea, but mine does this, and the difference is that his idea is something like that, yeah, or his model does this, and my concept is like that. So build a fence so that nobody confuses which idea belongs to you, and nobody will tell you that you took something from somebody else. Also, it is very nice, it is very pleasant to praise your opposition when you say, for example, Kowalski did a very interesting work on that, or somebody else had a very nice and very interesting, very valuable idea here. It's always nice to listen to, and who knows, maybe this opposition is sitting in the same conference room with you, and they will feel great about that. Who knows? Who knows? You'll never know. So when preparing your presentation, I will repeat that again, cut technical details. Even if your subject is very technical, think of it from the beginner's perspective, from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know the subject very well. You are the expert. You know your subject so well, so the technical details are not confusing to you. But if you put too many technical details, especially in one chunk on one slide, you can make the audience feel stupid, and you don't want to do that. Even if they are experts, they can feel stupid if you overwhelm them with too much detail, and if you don't have the time to explain that properly, they will feel bad that they don't understand, and we don't want our audience to feel bad. And in the following part, I'm going to discuss the tips on preparing slides. Sometimes slides can be disastrous, and sometimes they can be your best friend, and they actually can help to make your presentation shine. And we're going to do the latter option. And all the tips I'm going to give you will work for PowerPoint or Keynote or Google Slides or any other software. So the rules are more or less the same. So the slides. And what's the first sin when it comes to slides? Too much text. Probably you've all seen this kind of slide, have you? So there are those slides where there is just too much text. Don't do that, please. If there is too much text, it feels overwhelming for the audience because there is so much knowledge in one chunk. And the audience has no idea what they should do, what to look at you, listen to you, or read the text, or maybe look at the charts. Probably some of you stopped listening to me and started reading. Don't read it. It's a very good article. Sorry, it's my article. It's interesting, but you don't have to read it. It's irrelevant. I just put some text here. But I hope I proved my point that too much text is a disaster because you lose your audience. Also, I'm going to come back to this slide in a moment, but please remember how overwhelming it may feel when there is too much content in one slide. So for this reason, get rid of all the unnecessary elements. For example, logos. You need your university or your institution's logo probably, but leave it at the first slide. You don't have to repeat it on each slide because it creates clutter, it is messy, and it may be overwhelming when you put some other graphical elements in a moment. The general rule, as for the text, is no more than 6 lines of text on a slide, like here, and no more than 7 words in a line. Of course, probably depends on the language, it may slightly differ, but this is the amount of text you want to put in one slide, no more. So this is actually not very much. But you can you can always make more slides than that. Because in the olden days, slides took much more time to prepare and present. You had to do them manually, you had to go to a special shop and they did it for you. Sometimes it took weeks. And then there was this machine which often broke, and it was just very painful. So the common advice was to have no more than 1 slide per 1 minute of speaking. And Today, very often people say the same thing, but it is not a general rule anymore because it's much easier and quicker to change slides and to even make them. So you don't need to worry about that, but rather you adjust to the number of slides to the content you present. So if you prefer more slides with less content, just go on. It's not a problem. But on the other hand, it may be helpful because if you divide in your head that you speak more or less 1 minute a slide, then you know how many slides you should prepare if you have, for example, a 20 minutes presentation. But also remember that even if you're allocated the 20 minutes in the program for your presentation, it will never be at 20 minutes of your presentation. There is always some time to devote for the technical stuff, for the introduction. Somebody comes into the room, somebody makes some noise, and also there is a question and answer session at the end, and it also takes some time, so you have to take that into consideration. So the number of slides can be a good indicator of how long your speech is going to be, but it doesn't have to be like that. It's all about what you want to present and about your style. So it's better to have more slides with less content than the other way around. And now let's talk about the background of the slide. So for the background, the general rule is choose the style you prefer, unless you have to use a certain template, for example, from your workplace or from university. But it is advisable to just use a plain colored background. Why? Because patterns are not the best backgrounds. They are distracting, they make the text hard to read, and they generate chaos and clutter. And your slides must be well contrasted. The color schemes are important because they help you. They help you to convey your message. If you're not sure how to combine the colors, if you're not sure if they are going to work, you don't need to waste your time on that, because usually the ready-made templates and the ready-made color schemes in your software is enough. So if you if you use the templates, it's going to be fine. Sorry for that. Of course, there is the classical combination of white background and dark letters, and for some experts advise to use this very combination. It is said to resemble a scientific paper more, and it wakes the audience up. So it's better for smaller rooms, and it's also better for teaching for smaller classrooms because it wakes the audience, and it's so fresh, so easy to read. Although with dyslexic students, it is slightly different, but you've probably seen the presentation on Thursday about that. On the other hand, black is the black background with white or light letters is said to be more suitable for large conference rooms because it helps the audience focus. And also, if you care about the environment, this one is said to be more environmentally friendly because it saves more energy. It takes less energy to project. Of course, it doesn't have to be black. It can be dark blue or dark purple, but it just needs to be very, very dark. On the other hand, this is probably the worst possible combination. Red background with green letters. I wanted to make it even worse, but the program didn't let me. I wanted to make the letters even more lime green, but I couldn't do that. So for people who are colorblind, this is impossible to read. They won't be able to read the thing, so keep that in mind. But also for people without any problems with their vision, this color combination is painful to read for a longer time. It is tiring for the eyes, and also it in the longer run it is agitating. It may feel people anxious or nervous or stressed out. And this combination is not good either. It is very badly contrasted. So for a combination like lime green and light blue, it is impossible to read. Of course, probably no one will create slides like that. This is obvious. But when you use many colors on your slide, you have to remember that some of the letters or some of the words may be impossible to read because of this. So you have to choose your color scheme wisely. And now let's talk about fonts. You may not be aware of the fact that some of the default fonts that your software provides, that are, for example, provided in PowerPoint and other programs, are actually wrong according to specialists, according to experts. Why is this? It is because we have two types of fonts. Fonts are divided into the serif and sans serif types. So serifs are those fine lines which finish the main strokes of the letters. You can see the T with the serifs on the right-hand side of the screen, and on the left-hand side of the screen there is T without serifs. And when you present, when you create something for a screen in a presentation, you should use those fonts without serifs. So for example, Arial or Helvetica are sans serif fonts, so they are better. And even the infamous Comic Sans is good too. Why are those fonts why are those fonts better? Because without the serifs, they're easier to read and they are quicker to read. They read more quickly and easily. On the other hand, the serif fonts read better in text, in the printed text. They are better for books. They are better for printed dissertations. They are generally better for letters on paper. So you can see that actually in the slide that when those sentences are the same size, I mean the same point size, but the serif fonts at the bottom took more space, so they broke into two lines, and it shows you that even this fact is enough to show you that they are slightly longer to read. And another rule is that you should use one font per slide, the same font per slide, and even preferably throughout the whole presentation. When you mix fonts, when you add more of them, it is also more difficult to read. What about the sizes? When it comes to the font sizes, you should of course adjust them to your screen or to your general preference or to your needs, but generally the letters should be a size 18 or bigger. Some experts even say that 18 is much too small and you should start somewhere between 25 and 35 or even much more. The size, the small font size for you may be also the indicator that you want to squeeze too much content into one slide. So if your fonts are small, you have to think, am I putting too much text into this slide or not? So I don't know which one would be the best for you, but for me as a student, it is at least 40, 46, even more. So even if they say 18 is okay, I think it is too small. So please bear that in mind. And if you include references, for example, if you want to acknowledge some other people's job, like here, I wanted to put a picture of a cute cat for you, but it's not my picture, so I put the reference. So references can use smaller fonts, but never use a smaller font than 14 points, because beyond that, they will be just impossible to read. And speaking of references, when you use somebody else's material or when you quote somebody, when you have the need to to put a reference, don't put them at the end. Again, like with the related works, no one will care to have a look or to wait until the end of your presentation. And if they are presented immediately along with the material which is referenced, then the picture is clear and you've done your job. Another tip is not to use all capital letters, not to write in caps, although some templates even do it for us. But first of all, this kind of sentence is more difficult to read. It takes slower, it takes longer time to read, so it slows the whole process down. But also, please remember that in today's world, in the era of internet, caps mean shouting, and probably you don't want your audience to feel they are being shouted at. So unless it is absolutely necessary, for example, for the acronyms, don't use caps. It's better to just write in plain text, like a plain sentence. Some people tend to capitalize every first letter of a word, like in this slide. It's a style, but it is good for maybe for titles, but you shouldn't do it to a larger extent, to a longer extent, because it also slows the reading process down. It feels unnatural, and people start wondering, why is it in caps? Is it important? Is it a proper name or something? So just avoid that. And also, you don't need all those special effects. As you can see, when I prepare the slide for you, I put at least 5 different effects here, and it just looks terrible, but you get my point. You don't need that to convey your message. So all the decorations, the shadows, reflections, initials here are, unless you have to something specific to show using them, you don't really need to care about them as well. And let's get back to this slide, to this clutter slide from the beginning. Once again, let me repeat that. Less is more. When it comes to your slides, less is more. The slides should have a lot of air around them, and they should have a lot of white space. Actually, you should be very generous with the white space around your slide, because your audience is going to understand your ideas better when they don't have to read so much. But also, it's a very technical thing. If your projector in the room is misaligned, it may so happen that part of your slide gets cut and they won't see it. Yeah, probably you've seen it many times. So if you leave a lot of white space around the slide, then your audience will be able to see the message, even though it may be cut at the side. And also, if your audience sits at the same level, for example, in a classroom, but very often in a conference room as well, so the people at the very back behind won't see the bottom of the slide, probably. So if you leave a lot of space at the bottom, they will be able to see it well. They won't have to do this all the time to see if there is anything at the bottom of the slide. And once again, some technical stuff, some more technical stuff. So when you put blocks of texts, they shouldn't be longer than 2 lines per each, because if they are bigger, you again lose your audience. They automatically start reading, and they cannot process what you're talking about. So you can either read or you can either listen. So if you put more text, you lose your audience. And if you include lists, of course, sometimes it is impossible to have a very short list, but an ideal list is 3 points, only long. It can be shorter, but longer than that, it also it may be considered too long. You can always split your list maybe in 2 slides to put some air around that, so that the audience will understand it better. And now let's talk shortly about the illustrations you used during your presentation. So all the graphical, all the illustration material you put on your slides should serve some purpose. Don't put pictures just for decoration, because although it may look nice, it can be distracting to your audience. So each picture should support your idea. And the rule is, if you can show something instead of talking about that, just do it. And also, it was fashionable some time ago, but you don't need to put those goofy clippers, those funny pictures. If you have the need to, go ahead, but you don't need to, don't feel obliged to put them. Your presentation is as good without them. And also, as I said, you should keep your slides simple. Also, keep your images simple as too. Give resources. I must stress that enough. And if you have the chance, just make your own figures, so you don't have to say, I took this from here and I took that from another source. Please remember that the illustrations, like diagrams or some charts, like text, they also should be well contrasted. And when you prepare an illustration for a slide, the text, the fonts in that should be larger than usual. So they should be larger than you would use in print, for example, and then it will be good. And also, it's a good idea to use intuitive colors and intuitive symbols, to use a lot of icons, some things which are understandable no matter the language of your audience. For example, in this slide, you have the red color for hot and blue for cold. For example, in biology or chemistry, you could show that in the slide with the colors. But also you can use, for example, when you present in medicine, when you present the number of deaths, you can just use the cross to indicate death cases, etc., etc. So you get my idea. It was a very dark example, but that was the first that came to my mind. Sorry for that. You should also avoid putting complex equations or complex diagrams on the slide, as this one. This is nothing relevant, it's just the scheme of the diagram of Tokyo's subway system, but it proves my point. Instead of that, if you absolutely have to, present the most relevant fragment, but do it first. Start with that, introduce it, explain what you're talking about, why this is important, and then only then you can show the whole picture for you, in order for your audience to get the idea of the scale of how big, how complex it is. But again, not at the beginning, because you may if you start with this, you may again make your audience feel stupid, and we don't want that. Yeah, this is overwhelming, this is confusing, and it's irrelevant. Start with the small part, and if you absolutely need to, show the whole picture. The same is true for very complex equations in mathematics. You don't need to put everything on the slide, because nobody will even be able to comprehend. Start small, maybe show the scale. And what about animations? Well, they are unnecessary. Unless you have a very good reason or it proves your point, don't use them. They are a waste of your time and the audience's time. And the same goes with those sound effects for words. For example, when a word slides in and does this whoosh sound or ping, it is unnecessary. You don't need that. Your voice makes the human contact with the audience, and that's enough. Of course, if you play videos or if you play some recordings, that's a different story. But those decorative sounds are unnecessary. Don't use them. And, oh, sorry. It's also a good idea to add page numbers. This way, when someone wants to ask you a question, especially after the whole presentation, they may just remember the number of the slide and ask you, regarding the diagram on slide number this or that, I wanted to ask you the question. But you should avoid doing this. Don't include the total count, because it may end up in a disaster, especially if there are very many slides in your presentation, because some members of the audience become fixated on this number. They start counting and dividing in their heads. Is she going to finish before the lunch break or not? Still 100 slides to go. Don't do that. Of course, don't worry. In my presentation, there are not 213 slides. There are definitely fewer. So don't do that. It's unnecessary and it creates chaos as well. And often before you start presenting, you're just standing there in the room for a while before they introduce you. And the same goes for the online presentations. You can show the first slide before you actually start. And it is good to include your contact details there, to include your institution, to include, of course, the title of your presentation, so that your audience has the general idea and they have something to look at before you begin. And if you have, and this is the place to put the logos in as well. And if you have any co-authors, this is the place where you should acknowledge them. So if you work with someone, put them here so that everybody knows from the beginning that it is a collab and not your own work. There is also an ongoing debate whether you should a title of the slide on each slide. Some people do this and they argue that this helps to get the general idea of and where you are in the presentation, and that's very good. If you think that the title helps your audience orientate themselves in the presentation, then do it. But some other people say it also generates unnecessary clutter on the slide, that it generates mess on the slide. So it's up to you whether you use it or not, but it's not necessary. You don't have to do this. And if you have a lot of data, don't flood your audience with that. Use just as much as it's needed to prove your point, to explain your idea, but not more. Just enough to convince your audience about the credibility of your science, of your work. Don't put too much, like in this example, there is just too much data. And in the same vein, remove what you won't explain. I mean, if you won't explain something, don't put it on the slide. It is very bad when you hear, or when the presenter says, "Oh, we don't have the time for that, so we'll skip it." Oh, come on. Oh, come on. So why did you put it here in the first place? If you don't put it on the slide, even if you know that there was something missing, your audience doesn't know that, but they will know if you leave it on the slide. And they will feel, if you skip it, they will feel that they don't know enough. They will feel that something is missing. So remove what you won't explain and you'll be good as well. Sorry for this little joke, but always remember to check your spelling. This is especially true for older versions of PowerPoint, because although it had the spell check, it checked only the one slide. So even if you ran the spell check, at least in my version, it only checked the first slide and the rest were left out. I don't know why it works this way. So check your slides, because if you put I mean, the other way around. Your slides should always be perfect. But if there are mistakes in your slides, it just looks as like if you didn't care about that. So be careful about this, please. So now you have your slides. They are perfect. They are lovely. What to do next? There are actually 3 things you should do now. Prepare, prepare, and prepare. You should know your subject backwards and forwards. And you also should know exactly how you're going to present it, step by step. Have it in your head. And you should also practice, but not in your head. Yeah. You should practice in front of a mirror if you prefer, or in front of your computer, or you can ask your friend to listen to you and be as critical as possible. Because if you repeat the text only in your head, it actually takes much more time to prepare, and you won't get the feedback. If you listen to yourself, you'll know if you speak too quickly or too slowly, or if you stutter, or if you say too much. You know, you always sounds good in your head, but when you start speaking, it may turn out to be slightly different. So prepare, prepare, prepare. I know I can repeat it all the time, but it is the most important thing in this part of the presentation. So let's say your slides are ready. You've gone through your presentation 100 of times. You've told it to all your family members and all your pets. You are in the conference room or the lecture hall, and your presentation is going to start in 10 minutes. What to do now? So, first of all, take care of your body and go to the toilet. Because no matter if you need it or not, you'll think just before a presentation, maybe I should have gone. If you do this, you won't have this problem. And speaking of other physical or bodily aspects, before the presentation, avoid large meals and avoid dairy. Otherwise, you might feel you need to clear your throat more. For some people, there is no problem with that, but some other are more sensitive and they have the problem with the throat. So if you're allowed, take some water on stage. So if you take sips throughout your speech, it keeps your voice natural, and it also gives you the time to have a break, have a short pause, and regain your composure if you need to. And from my experience, still water is the best, because sweet drinks and tea and also coffee with milk makes you clear your throat more. And if you have fizzy drinks like Pepsi or Coke or whatever, well, it may end up in a small accident, yeah, and it may be embarrassing. Again, for some people it is not a problem, but for some others it may be. So just take your water and it will be fine. And before you even start, test your equipment in advance. Come to the room earlier if it's possible, test the laptop, test the connection, test if everything works. The same is true for your internet or Zoom presentations. So if technology doesn't work and you just run there trying to make it work again, it is embarrassing for the audience. They don't know what to do. Should they just avoid looking at you? It is not a very pleasant situation, so let's try to avoid it. And please remember that laptops sometimes break, so always make sure to have a copy of your presentation on your memory stick with you. And also, this is something which happened to me today before the presentation. Always remember to update your software, because an hour before my presentation, my meeting with you, my computer said, why don't we update the operating system? And it took half an hour. So during the presentation or just before the presentation, you could not have enough time to update everything. And at least with my computer, when I don't have all the necessary updates, it just doesn't work. For example, the sound doesn't work, or Zoom stops working. So you have to be careful about that. And what's that? If you have anything to say, if you have any say in the venue, in the room you're going to present, make sure there is plenty of fresh air inside, so open the windows before that. And also make sure that there is plenty of light in this room, that the place is well lit. Of course, when the lights are off or when the lights are dim, it is easier to show your slides, that's for sure. But people can feel sleepy in a dark room, especially after their lunch break. And remember, when you think about that, what is more important, you and your voice and listening to you, or your slides? So it's better if they can see you and they can hear you and they can focus on you than, seeing the slides very well, but in a dark room where they just want to go to sleep. So if you have the choice, choose the room with a lot of light. And when it comes to your clothes, some people say it's not so important, but actually you shouldn't be too casual. Think about your target audience and dress smart accordingly. For example, if you're talking to your fellow students, choose their level and dress smarter than the average level. Even if you present a class project, it will be much appreciated if you look professional. And also, smart clothes make you look and feel more confident as well. So if you dress nicely, you will feel better about that, and it will be appreciated. So you always remember about this aspect. And be confident. Muster up all your confidence you have, because remember, when you are here, when you present your topic, you are the expert. You are the authority on your subject. Probably you are prepared so well, you know this subject so well, that you know it best. You know it even better than your supervisor. So keep that in mind. At this very moment, you are the expert here. And probably, of course, it's probable that the room is full of experts, but usually they're harmless. They don't want to do you any harm. They won't, bombard you with questions. They won't eat you alive. They are just here to listen to you with interest. So keep that in mind and be confident in what you know. And I said something about the laptop, and I'll once again speak of that. If you have the authority, for example, if you are the teacher, you may ask the audience to switch their laptops off, to switch their mobile phone off, and just to listen to you. But in most cases, you don't have this power. So in your head, try to make your presentation so interesting, so engaging, that they just, they won't feel the need to scroll through their phones or open their laptops and check their emails. So this is your ultimate goal. And when you go on stage, one of the most important elements of your presentation is showing your enthusiasm. When you at least try to be enthusiastic, your enthusiasm makes the audience be much more receptive to what you want to teach them. And if you exhibit passion about your subject, you inspire people. Maybe they will want to try what you told them about. Maybe they want to read something more. Maybe they will just check your paper or check your website. You want to inspire them. This is what your enthusiasm does. It inspires them. Of course, if you are a naturally shy person, it is much more difficult to do. But still, if you pretend to be an extroverted person, if you pretend to behave like one, no one will notice you're bluffing, believe me. Just pretend you're not shy. Just pretend to be extroverted for the 20 minutes of your presentation. It's not so long. And if you don't seem to be excited about your presentation, if you seem boring, so why would your audience be excited about your subject? And if you smile, if you have good energy, and if you don't speak in a monotone voice all the time, when you use your pitch, use the sound of your voice to your advantage, and you don't hide behind the podium or your laptop, don't do that. It will work wonders. And also, if there is the possibility to move around the room, do it. Don't stand in one place. Don't stand behind the podium. Move so that you will feel you loosen up, you breathe more freely, and you feel more relaxed when you can just move a bit. And one of the most important things during the presentation is also not to read from the slides. First of all, your audience knows how to read, and if you read for them, it may be annoying, right? But also, when you read, it seems as if you're not really well prepared to talk about your subject and that you just want to pass the time so that no one will notice that you're not prepared. So don't read from the slide. But also, don't read from your notes or don't read from any of your cards. Of course, you can have a look at your notes, not a problem. You can have a look at your cards, but don't do this. Don't read from them because you lose the eye contact with your audience. And the eye contact is something you should keep almost all the time. And if you read from the screen, let's imagine this behind is the screen. If you read from the screen, you turn your back to the audience. So you cannot keep the eye contact when you turn to the screen and read from it because, well, the obvious. And if you have trouble maintaining eye contact with your audience, you should scan the room and look and talk to them. You don't have to look a person in the eye, but you have to pretend you look into their eyes and you speak to them, not to your shoes, not to your note, not to your laptop, but to those people. In each room, very often there is a person who nods. Probably you know who I'm talking about, the person who listens to you and nods, and they also keep the eye contact with you. So this person is a treasure. So speak to them, and if they nod, if they look into your eyes, you can feel if they're listening or not. And also you have somebody to speak to. You have a living person in front of you, and you don't have to find something to speak to. It's more natural when you speak to somebody. Also, you have to be in the image. I won't show it here because I'm not in the conference room, but imagine if there was this big conference room and the screen is somewhere on the right and I'm standing there on the left and I'm telling you something about the slides. But there is a lot of space between me and the slides, so you don't know what to look at the slides or to look at Alexandra, to look at it or okay, and you end up moving your head like at a tennis match. It's bad. You should avoid that. So always remain as close to the slides as possible so that your audience will keep you in the image, in the picture, and it will also be to your advantage. What about laser pointers? So they are and they were fashionable some time ago, but they are good maybe for playing with your cat. With your cats. If you don't absolutely need to, don't use them. First of all, some presenters tend to play them during the presentation in a nervous way, and the audience instead of listening to them, looks at their pointer. Also, if your hands are shaking because you're stressed, the laser will show it on the screen that you're shaking, and it is not good as well. And also, if you present something with this, you all again turn to the screen, so the audience looks at your back. You lose the eye contact with your audience. If you need to show something on your slide, either use your hand or your arm and show it with your arm, or put the arrows into your slide, like I did some slides ago. Just put, this is important, and then you don't have to show this with your hand, with your arm. And let's talk about the physicality and the posture now. So keeping good posture helps you keep the stress and anxiety at bay. So I will show that in a moment. Stand naturally and stand in a neutral pose, not too stiff, but also not too slumped. Don't hide your head in your arms, because a good posture will help you breathe more deeply, and you will speak easier and stronger. And if you can, breathe from your diaphragm. It helps a lot when it comes to your voice emission. And when presenting, people tend to speak too quickly. It is very important, especially if you're speaking in a foreign language, or if your language is a foreign language to your audience, or if there is a translator or interpreter. Please keep that in mind. And remember to control the pace. You may even remember each slide whenever you change the slide, like I do. Remind yourself, slow down, slow down, slow down. And speak slowly and clearly. And also, if you are in the room, imagine that you want your voice to reach the last person in the room, the person at the very back of the room. If you have the microphone, that's good. They will lower the volume. But if you don't have the microphone, speak to the person at the back of the room. And also, you don't need to talk non-stop. You can obviously make pauses if you needed. It sounds natural. It sounds as if you think of what you're speaking about, and also it can help you to regain control. So don't be afraid to make pauses. It is completely natural, and you will feel better. And now let's talk shortly about the body language, because you have to be aware of this. When speaking publicly, people tend to become very self-conscious about their hands. But you must remember that speaking in public is just a modified version of conversation. So use your hands the same way as you would use them in your conversation. For example, you might use your hands to mark some ideas in space. Let's say, this is the most expensive solution, but the best one. This is the cheapest one. We have to find the middle ground. Or that was in the future, or that was in the past. In the future, we're going to do this. And in the meantime, we're going to do that. But also, you shouldn't gesture all the time, because it is tiring for the audience. As with the illustrations, your gestures need to have a purpose. So what to do when you're not gesturing? I will show you some examples of what not to do. So definitely don't keep your hands behind your back like that, because especially if you move around the room, it reminds of military or an old lecturer. And when you start to gesture, you just do this back and forth, and it looks quite strange. Some people put their hands in their pockets, like that. I don't have pockets, so I can't show it to you. But on the one hand, it is casual, and in some contexts, it can be okay. But in some certain situations, it may be considered arrogant, or in my country, in Poland, it is considered rude, so don't keep your hands in your pockets when you present. Some people put their hands on their hips like that, but it also can be seen as overly confident and arrogant and can be perceived in a negative way. And you also should avoid gestures which may be considered defensive. So folding your arms suggests sometimes being closed off, that you don't want actually to be there. And some people do this. They touch their arm with this self-soothing, self-calming manner. And it helps them to calm down, but it may raise the anxiety of the audience. The audience may feel uneasy. But the worst thing to do is to put your hands here, especially for men, because when you start gesturing, it may look humorous, sorry for that, but it's not the best thing to do. So what to do with your hands? You need to find the resting position which feels comfortable for you. Some people put their hands just along their body like that and bring them up if they want to show something. But other people don't feel very comfortable with their arms just being loose here. So they can keep their hands like a TV reporter somewhere around the belt. And it looks very, very nice. It looks professional. And it's easy to gesture from this position. So you make your point, you show something, and then you put your hands back in this resting position. So this is a very good position to start with. So in other words, allow your hands to gesture, but don't just let them float in space or hang in space. It will look very unnatural. So make your gesture, make your point, and then bring your hands back to rest, and it will look great. Let's talk about the beginning of the presentation shortly. Some people suggest beginning a presentation with a joke. But if you're not good at telling jokes, it may feel awkward and stiff. It's better to start with a promise. Promise the audience what they will know after the lecture, after your presentation. For example, after the end of this presentation, you will feel more confident in speaking in public. Or after the end of this presentation, you will know what to do with your hands when you present. Or at the end of this lecture, you will know how to make great impression with your slides. This is definitely the better way of starting, because every presentation is the opportunity to make an impression, so it must be solid. No matter how fascinating your presentation is, if you don't capture the audience's attention within the first minute or maybe 2 minutes, you'll miss the momentum. Because the first minute is when you establish the command of the room, and when you signal to the audience that you're calm, that you know what you're talking about, and they know that they can just relax and listen to your voice. So don't miss this moment. However, this often doesn't happen. Instead, we hear something like, "Hello, thank you for bearing with me," or "Hello, Bydgoszcz." And other people start with, "I want to start by apologizing for something." No, never apologize. Do not do it. Because some people say a lot of stuff like that. "Oh, I didn't have the time to prepare this talk properly. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sick. I didn't sleep very well. My computer broke down last night and I don't have the results. Or I'm not an important person. Or I'm just a student. Or I'm not so qualified to speak to you." No, 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 no. Don't do this. Because firstly, it's not their business. And they don't know what to do with this information. They don't know how to react to that. If you want them to be sympathetic towards you, so what exactly do you expect them to do? What should they do? You will just embarrass them, and we don't want to embarrass our audience. And besides, if your beginning is your promise to the audience, so What do you promise to your audience when you apologize? When you apologize, you promise them that your presentation is going to be boring and messy. Probably the best way to start your presentation is to start with some story. A story is engaging, is innovative, is educational, and it is inspiring. You can say something like, 10 years ago, I never could have imagined that. Or the year was 2017. Or I will never forget the first time that. Or what would you do if you were in my shoes? Listen to my story. Or I have a confession to make. I hated public speaking. Or among my friends, I'm famous for this or that. So a story is definitely better and more engaging. And if you start powerfully, you will make a powerful impact. And you can also start with something engaging the audience, like a question to raise hands. Have you ever had to make a speech in public? Raise your hand, please. Or you can show them a movie or present an analogy, anything to connect the audience with your speech. And never memorize your whole presentation, because if something interrupts you, it will be very difficult to come back, to get back on track. Instead, it's advisable to just memorize the first few sentences. So you can start without engaging your brain very much, and then you'll just start easily. And remember, especially before the presentation, take deep breaths, breathe deeply. And watch the audience for questions. The questions are not a problem, just the opposite. They are the golden opportunity to connect with your audience. So encourage the questions during a talk. You can even have some short breaks when the audience asks you questions. If there is not enough time, it's better to cut your presentation, to make it shorter, but to keep the questions. It's better to connect with the audience than to and not to present the material. So because a fully engaged audience is the best that you can get from the presentation. But what if you don't know the answer, or if you don't know part of the answer? Just admit it. Never lie. It's better to be honest than to bluff and use a lot of jargon and smoke and scientific vocabulary to hide the fact that you don't know something. You can always thank for the question. You can praise the person who asked you. You can say it was very interesting, and you can, for example, promise to contact them after the presentation, but never lie. Don't pretend to know if you don't know, because it's terrible. And also, it's very important to be punctual with the ending, because when the time is up, people automatically stop listening to you. So continuing is counterproductive. And don't ask people, can I take 10 more minutes, or can I continue? I know the time's up. Come on, they won't tell you no, but they will die inside. So they won't. They are polite, so they don't want you. That they want to go home. No, just cut your presentation, make it short, and finish it. So very often, everything goes very well until the end of the presentation, and then the presenter says, well, that's about it, and they disappear. It's better to give your key message again, to remember to take it home with them. So you can stop where you started. You can start with a strong statement, you can give the supporting evidence, and you can finish with it to make it even stronger. And instead of dry and boring conclusions, say what the contribution of your presentation was. You learned this or that. During this presentation, you learned about this or that. So this is definitely better. And with your intonation, mock the end of the presentation by laying down the sentences so that everybody in the room, even if they are sleeping, will know that you're coming to an end. For example, you can say, that, ladies and gentlemen, was what I wanted to share with you. And end with a smile. Oops, what is happening? Sorry. Okay, something technical happened with my connection. So I apologize. And then there is this dilemma whether you should thank your audience or not. Experts are not very sure about that. Some people say that you shouldn't thank your audience, because if you say thank you for bearing with me or thank you for your attention, it's like, you know, they are just polite to stay here with you, that you somehow say that your presentation was bad, you thank them, but despite that, thank you for being here. No, they say that smiling is the best ending, and that if you say something like, it's been a great pleasure to be with you here, or I'm looking forward to coming back, you salute the audience, you acknowledge them, and it's definitely a better thing to do. And just as the end of my presentation, I wanted to give you some personal tips on how to prepare for your presentations. So in your life, you will attend many more talks than you give, and use that to your advantage. Observe, take notes, notice what you see, notice what you like, notice what you don't like, and use it later. Take notes of interesting techniques, of solutions, of color schemes, even of the whole phrases you liked, and use them in your talks. You can even have a separate notebook for the ideas, for your speech ideas. And watch other people's speeches. For example, TED Talks are a great source of inspiration. You can even attend them in person if you have the opportunity. There are plenty of topics to choose from, and usually the level is very, very high. So I encourage you to watch TED Talks. They are one of the best sources of inspiration here. And when you listen to other people's talks, try to identify the key ideas. If you can't identify the key idea, it means they failed. So remember that and use this as a lesson of how not to present a topic. And don't be completely serious unless the occasion needs it. Don't be human, be natural, be just be yourself. And this is the last piece of advice I wanted to give you. It is slightly sad, but this is true. The general standard is often low, so you don't need to be outstanding to stand out. Please remember about that. So to sum up, presenting in public is a skill which requires little talent, very little talent, some knowledge, and a lot of practice. But with enough work and enough knowledge, I promise you, you will nail your every presentation. So good luck.
Thank you.